Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about my Week 2 wide receiver starter sits for the 2019 fantasy football season. On today's episode, we're going to start off by talking about some fantasy football news, some news around the National Football League in the last 24 hours that is extremely important. Then after that, going over the wide receiver matchups for Week 2 of the season, and then going over my 1 through 36 wide receiver rankings. If you don't know already, down in the description are timestamps, so for those of you who are interested in hearing about specific player insight, go down there and click on the specific player that you're looking for. While you're down there, if you haven't yet already, click that subscribe button, join the community, like Tyron Smith, left tackle of the Dallas Cowboys. I want you to pancake block that subscribe button, pancake block that notification bell button, and join the community and try to help us get to 8,000 subscribers. That would be incredible. Thank you. All right, guys. Hey, how's it going? Okay, before we begin, Patreon link down in the description for those of you who are interested in getting all of your 2019 fantasy football questions answered. All right, that is out of the way. Let's talk about a little bit of news just really quickly regarding two players. Actually, three players. Let's talk about the first one, Tyreek Hill. Tyreek Hill, information came out that he will be out for 4 to 6 weeks potentially. That is pretty significant time considering all that is in the National Football League, especially for fantasy football. That is practically half of your season if you don't make the playoffs. So that's pretty significant, unfortunately. But there are other options. There is Demarcus Robinson. There is Mecole Hardman. There are other receiving options that can fill in the void for your roster. And also those plethora of wide receivers I mentioned in the last couple days in waiver wires. So you can go check those guys out, pick them up if they're available still in your league. Another player I want to talk about, Hunter Henry, going to miss significant time, fractured his patella on Sunday's game against the Indianapolis Colts. Extremely unfortunate for a guy that tore his ACL before even the 2018 season began, was able to fight back and get back to full health almost before the season ended. He was suited up for that game against the Patriots in the playoffs, so it was a pretty quick turnaround. Unfortunately, another injury. We'll see if this guy can somehow muster another quick recovery. But it doesn't look good, unfortunately. As of right now, in terms of who's on roster, I don't think they're going to get Antonio Gates. But if that's the case, then okay. But I don't think Antonio Gates is a great fantasy option. If in fact, there's Virgil Green, but he is, primarily a blocking tight end specialist for the Chargers. As of right now, I wouldn't mind if the Chargers went out and made a trade for a tight end. Maybe go grab Kyle Rudolph, because the Vikings drafted Irv Smith from Alabama. Why not go get Kyle Rudolph? Perhaps maybe go and get Jack Doyle. There are other options around the National Football League that can block and be receiving threats that can pose a pretty good option for you for the Chargers. So I'm hoping that they can go out and make a play for a tight end position to give another tight end in the National Football League, at least in the fantasy football landscape, more value. Because as soon as you join this Chargers organization, your value is going to go up comparatively to where Kyle Rudolph and Jack Doyle currently stand as is. So we'll see. But that's another set of news. Another one, AJ Green, for those of you who have him on bench, as of right now, began running today. That's great news. Hopefully, there's still a good amount of time till he comes back. Probably will be back before Tyreek Hill, but still, this is a guy that if he can come back and join this offense, who looked great this past week, Cincinnati can be a very posable threat in terms of scoring some fantasy points at the wide receiver position. And then the last piece of news, speaking of wide receivers, Antonio Brown. What a situation. Just when you think Antonio Brown can go ahead and join the organization, the Patriots, and get rid of the Twitter and get rid of the Instagram and stop posting YouTube videos, he gets hit with some unfortunate news. The plain hard fact is, if he's guilty, he's guilty. If he's not, we'll figure that out. But either way, as of right now, hopefully, if he's guilty, then, it's unfortunate for the victims. But, Antonio Brown just continues to be a mess for fantasy owners and the National Football League. There's probably a pretty good opportunity or chance that Roger Goodell throws him on the commissioner's exempt list and he misses a significant amount of time, maybe even the whole season, if this federal case ends up being something of of relevancy. As of right now, in terms of the Patriots, they've come out and they've made a statement. They've said, we understand, blah, blah, blah. We take this seriously. Well, okay, they haven't cut him yet. So as of right now, I guess they're also doing their due diligence to make sure this isn't just a fake hoax. They want to, confirm that, hey, he is guilty. Now we can cut him. So, you're innocent until proven guilty. So I guess we just wait and see how this turns out. But anyway, those are the news stories that I wanted to go over. Pretty relevant in terms of a lot of fantasy value, a lot of players that aren't going to be playing for quite some time now. So we'll see. And it makes a pretty big difference for Antonio Brown because he would be on this list to the left of me if he was ready to go. But you never know. He might even play this week. We're just not given enough information at the time. Outside of that, let's talk about matchups, shall we? Here we go. Let's get into it. We're talking about week 2 of the fantasy football season. All right, last week, it was pretty apparent how some of these defenses are just god-awful, plain and simple. The Giants, they just ran out of the building, plain and simple. Dak Prescott used his arm. He found, 4 or 5 different receivers for touchdowns. Jason Witten, Jarwin, Gallup didn't catch one, but Amari Cooper did, and so did Randall Cobb. So there you go, 4 different targets with touchdowns. They completely destroyed the Giants' defense. So for John Brown, that looks good this week, especially for Josh Allen. Another juicy matchup. Obviously, the Saints gave up a lot of points to the wide receiver position. We're not, that's not anything surprising. The Miami Dolphins got slaughtered. The Seahawks, the Chiefs have always been slaughtered in terms of their secondary. Even with the additions they've made, it doesn't really matter. As soon as Marcus Peters was traded away, they really haven't done much there in the secondary. The Eagles, look, just looking up and down this entire thing, somehow, some way, Cleveland against the wide receiver position managed to be the best team out of week 1. Even though A.J. Brown pretty much did everything. He had over 100 yards receiving. He was the only receiver that did anything for that offense. Otherwise, it was Henry and Delaney Walker. And that was it, plain and simple. So a lot of these stats, they really shouldn't even be taken into account. I just wanted to show you guys this so that you guys have a pretty good baseline of who was getting completely torched last week. In terms of fantasy value, does this make a huge difference? Not really. I think some teams had some pretty big performances that may eventually phase out, and then some teams didn't really throw the ball much because they didn't have to. I mean, the Vikings literally threw the ball 10 times on Sunday and ran the ball 30 plus times in order to just kill out the clock, play the game, play your defense, and get out of there with the W. So there's many different variables that can be taken into account. But I just wanted to show you guys this. And without further ado, let's get into my rankings, shall we? All right, 1 through 12, these guys should be started at your wide receiver 1 or 2 position and not worried about this week. Really, before I begin, this was a tough list to make, in my opinion. I think there are 48 viable, maybe even 50 viable wide receivers that can be considered to be started in your league this week. There is just off of the amount of breakout performances we saw this last weekend with McLaurin, with Ross, with Brown, with another Brown, with Jamison Crowder, with Quincy Enunwa going out with an injury, and Demaryius Thomas being traded to the Jets. There's so many breakouts from this past week that have to be accounted for, and it's really difficult. So I think there's never been so many wide receivers that I could honestly think of off the top of my head that could have great weeks going into week 2, but man, it's insane. Either way, let's talk about my top 12. Really quick tidbits on every single one of these guys. Number 1, Julio Jones playing against the Philadelphia Eagles secondary this coming week should be the easiest matchup of his life. I mean, we're talking about Julio Jones, one of the best wide receivers, a guy that in the last couple years has averaged 1,600 receiving yards a season, ended up getting a touchdown in week 1, struggled heavily against Xavier Rhodes. When Xavier Rhodes was on him last week, he only had 1 target and 0 receptions. Matt Ryan didn't even want to test the cornerback. That's why Julio Jones struggled so much. With Ronald Darby, it's going to be a feast. I mean, he's going to feast, plain and simple. There's a reason why they've given Julio Jones. He walked into the organization, last Saturday? He signed his signature, and they backed up the dump truck of $64 million guaranteed into his wallet. It was a signing bonus, $66 million contract, 64 at the signing. I mean, Julio Jones is the best. Moving on. Number 2, Michael Thomas playing against the Rams defense. Just looking back to last season, Michael Thomas against the Rams has always been good. Plain and simple, they cannot cover him. In the playoffs, during the regular season, Michael Thomas has torched them. He continues to be the number 1 wide receiver of this offense, a great contributor, plain and simple. And Michael Thomas should be started, and with a lot of confidence, especially into this matchup. I don't care if they're at home or they're in LA. There's going to be so many Saints fans in LA this week that Michael Thomas, he's going to be perfect. Moving on to number 3, DeAndre Hopkins. Probably right now the best wide receiver in football. The only reason I have him as my number 3 spot, Jalen Ramsey is not a cornerback to completely write off. I'm not saying that DeAndre Hopkins hasn't performed against him, because he surely did. I think last year, week 17, really put a number in on Jalen Ramsey. But then again, everyone was taking their shots at that Jaguars defense late last season. And what we saw Patrick Mahomes do last week, this offense is going to be able to feast. And DeAndre Hopkins, incredible week 1. Going to continue with that momentum into week 2. He's my number 3. Moving on to number 4, Odell Beckham Jr. Here we go, man. Odell Beckham, this is your week. Time to redeem yourself. John Brown last week had 25 fantasy points with of all people, Josh Allen throwing him the ball. You're the number 1 wide receiver of this team. The Jets are not great against the wide receiver position, even like last year. And I really do believe this is your week to break this out. Last week should have been it, but we're just going to keep hoping until you figure it out. And either way, we're starting you. So you're my number 4 into a good matchup on Monday night. We'll see how this goes. Moving on to number 5, Davante Adams. Now, here's the thing. I was mentioning Julio Jones against Xavier Rhodes, and he, didn't really get any work when he was covered by him. But Davante Adams has been successful against Rhodes in the past, which is pretty ridiculous. But they've somehow managed to, in the last couple performances, put up some good stats comparatively against him. There's no way that I'm leaving Davante Adams on my bench, guys. I understand that he struggled heavily in week 1, and there's a chance that this is a tougher matchup and he could struggle this week. But I'm never leaving a stud like this that I drafted in the first round onto my bench. There's no way in heck that I'm going to do that. And therefore, as my number 5, I'm very confident with him going into this matchup at home. Should be great for him. Moving on to number 6. That is right. Sammy Watkins. Sammy Watkins, of all the players, it's insane. It's honestly insane. 198 receiving yards, 3 receiving touchdowns last week. An incredible performance. Like I mentioned earlier this week, if he had done 42 fantasy points in 5 weeks, I would have been happy with Sammy Watkins. He did it in 1. Going forward, without Tyreek Hill in this offense, like I mentioned earlier in this video, it's going to be Sammy Watkins and Travis Kelce as the number 1 and 2 receiving options within this team. Going into the Raiders, this is a very juicy matchup for Patrick Mahomes. Ailing from an ankle injury, sure. His mobility in the pocket is going to be, a test for him and whether or not he can figure it out. But either way, Sammy Watkins is going to be able to either stretch the field and find a lot of targets and be fantasy relevant. He's my number 6 this week. Moving on to number 7, the guy on the thumbnail, Amari Cooper. Like I mentioned earlier, okay, here's the thing. The Bills, they weren't terrible against the passing game. And, they're not playing the Bills. What am I saying? Oh my God, they're playing the Redskins. Here's the thing about the Redskins. Thank you very much. Josh Norman is probably going to line up against Amari Cooper. That being said, Josh Norman's probably not going to ever be able to keep up with Cooper considering his speed. The way I see it, Cooper's completely fine. If this offense continues to throw the ball as consistently and successfully as they did last Sunday, there's no slowing down, and Amari Cooper is the number 1 of that team. Looked great. Overall, this offense, there's something to be, said about an offense that can so quickly score points on you with very little, hesitation. They just completely ran through the Giants, and I think they'll do the same against the Redskins this coming week. Moving on to number 8, Keenan Allen. Now, if Mike Williams is to miss time this week, doesn't really affect Keenan Allen. His production, his opportunity is completely mutually exclusive from what Mike Williams is getting in this offense. As of right now, Keenan Allen, fantastic week 1 against a very good secondary. The corners for the Colts, I bet you guys don't even know the names of them. DeSean is actually pretty good. There's a reason why they signed him for all that money this offseason. They have good cornerbacks. Yet he was still able, with his insane route running and zone awareness to find pockets within the defense and be very good in fantasy. If you guys didn't see, I think on one of the last offensive drives before the overtime, Phillip Rivers threw the back of the end zone where Keenan Allen was standing. I don't know if you guys saw that one-handed interception that linebacker had. Oh my God, that was one of the sickest highlights I've seen in a while. But anyway, I just wanted to point that out. Either way, this week going against the Lions, I think Keenan Allen will be fine. I'm not worried about him. He's still going to get his 10-plus targets, which should be great. Moving on to number 9, Adam Thielen. What's not to say about Adam Thielen? Sure, week 1 wasn't fantastic, but he got his touchdown. He got his points in a matchup in which they never really had to throw the ball. This coming week, they're going to have to. The back-and-forth competition between the Vikings and the Packers has been pretty high-scoring affairs in the past. And I think, Adam Thielen is the number 1 of this team, plain and simple. I keep saying plain and simple today. I don't know what it is, but it's I don't know. It's a quirk that I have. But anyway, I don't think that the top corners of the Packers are going to be able to stop Adam Thielen very easily. They struggled heavily with Allen Robinson of all wide receivers. Excuse me. So probably Adam Thielen, good to go as my number 9 this week. Moving on to number 10, Juju Smith-Schuster. Struggled mightily in week 1. But here's the thing. When you have Stephon Gilmore over, just shadowing you the entire game, and there's a safety over the top, always preventing you from, making any moves or being able to shake the corner and make a play, it's going to be difficult. And that's what the Patriots put pressure on top wide receivers every time they play against them, plain and simple. I keep doing it, man. I got to stop. I'm going to stop, guys. I'm going to stop. I got to go to an AA meeting and stop saying these things. So what I was saying, Juju Smith-Schuster playing against the Seahawks. Seahawks secondary didn't look good, plain and simple. John Ross scorched them. Tyler Boyd in the slot figured it out. Plain and simple. Oh, gosh, I got to stop this. It's pissing me off now. Juju Smith-Schuster should be great. He should find himself a rebound game here. Week 1's performance wasn't great, obviously because the Patriots defense, but I think that there's going to be a rebound here that's going to make fantasy owners really understand why they drafted Juju Smith-Schuster so early. So I have the confidence in him for sure this week as my number 10. Moving on to 11, Brandin Cooks. Playing against the Rams, has had great matchups in the past, similar to Michael Thomas. Brandin Cooks always shows up when they play against the New Orleans Saints. And, playing against your former team typically is a good thing. There's always a pop-off game here and there ready to happen, just like DeSean Jackson going and playing against, he went back to the Eagles and used to play for the Redskins, had that 2-touchdown game, but either way. Brandin Cooks should have a great week this week. I have him as my number 1 Rams wide receiving option, but the other two, they're not too far back, so you'll see them on the list. But Brandin Cooks, I prefer him over the other two certainly this week. Moving on to number 12, let's talk about Mike Evans. Okay, Mike Evans, according to what, before even week 1 began, he had a stomach bug that was bothering him and, limited him in practice throughout the entire week. I didn't think anything of it because really a stomach bug should not prevent you from getting more than, or, should not prevent you from getting targets. Safe to say, Jameis Winston was awful, did not play well, did not target Mike Evans enough, and Mike Evans suffered because of it. Going on a short week, there's always a chance that Mike Evans could still be sick play against the Carolina Panthers this coming week. So I'd look into that. If he is still sick and he's not feeling 100%, that's not great. But Mike Evans was drafted to be a stud wide receiver, and I don't want to leave a stud like this on my bench going into a juicy matchup on a Thursday night into a short week. I feel like Mike Evans could have another rebound game similar to Juju Smith that I'm predicting this week. So I don't mind playing him as my number 12 wide receiver this week. Moving on. Let's go ahead. Let's talk about some other guys that absolutely need attention this week. Stefon Diggs. Similar to the situation that's going on with Adam Thielen. This is going to be a shootout, I believe. I don't think the Vikings are going to be able to get away with throwing the ball 10 times and be perfectly fine with that. Stefon Diggs is a great wide receiver. Sure, has been ailing with the hamstring injury that has plagued him for the last couple weeks now. But as of right now, Stefon Diggs looked good, was able to run consistently. Did not play very many snaps last week, which is good because at least it gives him a little bit of time to rest and not have to overexert or re-aggravate that injury. Going into this week against the Packers, Diggs has been fantastic. If you go look at the last couple performances of Diggs against the Packers secondary, he destroys them, plain and simple. So the biggest question is whether or not Kirk Cousins is going to be protected long enough to get the ball out of his hands, and I think he'll be just fine. So Diggs is my number 13. Moving on to 14, T.Y. Hilton. So the way it works as of right now, Devin Funchess is gone. Devin Funchess broke his collarbone, so as of right now, T.Y. Hilton going forward is really the only receiving option that I can trust in terms of fantasy value for the Indianapolis Colts. Eric Ebron really wasn't targeted much. Jack Doyle wasn't targeted much. There's always a potential of another wide receiver, younger guy stepping up, one of those rookies. But for now, T.Y. Hilton, I mean, you play against the Titans, and I literally said it last week. T.Y. Hilton against the Titans has always been good. He's going to prove that, and he's going to explain to you guys exactly why I was so high on OBJ last week. T.Y. Hilton's going to solve that issue and let you guys know. He's my number 14. 15, Julian Edelman. Playing against Miami. I want to start all of my Patriots, plain and simple. But I can't believe I said it again. Man, I keep doing this. Julian Edelman, though. Goodness, guys, I'm losing my mind over here. I don't know what's going on. It's the concussions. It's the CTE. Maybe I'm hungry. I don't know what it is, but it's happening. Julian Edelman. Going into this Miami Dolphins matchup, really, I do not see any roadblocks in the way of this Patriots offense, whether they want to run the ball the entire game or pass the ball the entire game. They're going to put up a lot of points on this defense that doesn't really want to play. Eventually, it's going to end up being where the Dolphins are giving up the most points probably in the history of the NFL in the first two games. That's what I'm really predicting at this point. 48 points doesn't seem too crazy for Tom Brady in this offense after that first week against the Pittsburgh Steelers. So Julian Edelman as my number 15 wide receiver, fully confident with that. Number 16, Alshon Jeffery, playing against the Atlanta Falcons secondary. It does not matter, really. Alshon Jeffery is the number one wide receiver of this team. Zach Ertz did struggle. And DeSean Jackson did have a great week, but Alshon Jeffery, like I've mentioned in many videos prior, when Carson Wentz is under center, and it's not Nick Foles for this team, Alshon Jeffery is getting far more targets and far more usage within this offense, and that's exactly what we saw last week as the number one receiver of this team. 2 receiving touchdowns, 5 receptions, not too many yards. We're not expecting too many yards from him, but is a big-bodied, able receiver, especially in the red zone, that in a successful offense is going to have fantasy value. I like him as my number 16 this week. Moving on to 17, my second of the 3 applicable Rams wide receivers, Cooper Kupp. I'm perfectly fine with Cooper Kupp at the number 17 spot. Gets a great amount of targets. If he finds that ever elusive touchdown, that's going to make his week a 14-point week. Other than that, in a half full PPR, he's always going to be relevant because he truly is. Especially what we saw last week. No matter what, you tear your ACL, you come back, you're still Jared Goff's security blanket. They're pretty much handcuffed together, though. Security blanket wide receiver that he is going to find within this offense all the time. So Cooper Kupp as my number 17, really happy with it. Kenny Golladay, number 18. Here's the thing about Golladay. I thought he was going to have a bigger week 1, especially with Pat P down and out. So somehow, some way, Danny Amendola and Marvin Jones and TJ Hawkinson all mustered up pretty decent weeks, and some of them really good weeks, to kind of undervalue Kenny Golladay. So going into this Chargers matchup, not really afraid of it. I think Kenny Golladay is still the number one wide receiving option on this team. I understand the other guys were getting more targets, but that's up to Matthew Stafford to spread the ball out and find the open man. If they're going to go ahead and leave those other guys open, then so be it. But I think the Chargers are going to key in on that, and Golladay is going to be the number one option this week and going to have a good performance. He's my number 18. Moving on to number 19, DJ Moore. So here's the thought process. You play against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The Buccaneers, according to matchup purposes, were good against the 49ers last week. That's just a bunch of hullabaloo. Jimmy Garoppolo was awful last week in terms of accuracy, in terms of being able to at least move the ball down the field as an NFL quarterback. Did not look good. Even at times looked worse than Jameis Winston, which is pretty difficult to do. But that being said, this week, Carolina at home, short week, sure. But DJ Moore is going to be able to take the top off the defense. He is the number 2-3 receiving option, probably behind for sure McCaffrey. Greg Olsen had a lot of targets last week, but he's a little bit banged up. So DJ Moore is that number 2 receiving option this week. Should have a good week in a very good matchup. I like him as my number 19 wide receiver. Moving on to 20. Also in that game, Chris Godwin. Listen, Chris Godwin saved his week. He almost pulled a Mike Evans. He saved his week with that touchdown reception, which should be consistent. I think Chris Godwin may even be more consistent than Mike Evans this season in terms of targets and receptions. But the touchdowns are always going to be the determining factor between the two. And I think there's also even a chance that this week Godwin has himself another decent game in terms of the slot position. Playing there, Cooper Kupp, played pretty decently. If Jameis Winston wants to figure it out and maybe play some good football, Chris Godwin could have a good week as well again. He's my number 20 this week. Number 21, Josh Gordon. Another one of these New England Patriots that I want to start up this week. Has the absolute capability of just taking the top off the defense. Obviously, Miami's going to try to play a little bit better this week, but I don't think it's going to be making much of a difference. I like Gordon as 21. In a matchup that's just going to be a complete blowout. He could find himself another touchdown, 70 receiving yards. I wouldn't be surprised. Moving on to number 22, Tyrell Williams. Man, Tyrell Williams really, really stepped up. I mean, it's unbelievable. My entire mentality was AB's gone. There's no way that Chris Harris Jr. lets this guy completely just go off. And Tyrell Williams looked great. Some of the catches he made in double coverage, I mean, there were, where were you last year? For the Chargers, where were you? Either way, Tyrell Williams looked great. Going against the Kansas City Chiefs this week, who gave up a lot of points to D.D. Westbrook, to DJ Chark, to Chris Conley. Tyrell Williams is the number 1 receiving option here. Has a very good matchup, and I like him going against Kansas City Chiefs. He could even be higher on this list. If I sneeze the wrong way today, he could go up 3 spots for all I know. But as of right now, 22, as a wide receiver 2, should be started. Robert Woods, the last of the Rams wide receivers. Robert Woods always manages to find himself in trouble in this matchup against the Saints. Against not Corey Latimer, that's a wide receiver. What is Marshawn Lattimore? Against Marshawn Lattimore, Robert Woods isn't great. And off of last week's performance, looking how bad Jared Goff looked at times, there's always a chance that Robert Woods doesn't end up figuring it out this week. That's why I have him a little bit lower, but still, then again, he is Robert Woods. He's associated with a good offense. This could be a shootout in LA this weekend between the Saints and the Rams. So wide receiver 2, don't mind him. Put him in. My number 24, the last guy, the wide receiver 2s that I wanted to mention, Tyler Lockett. Tyler Lockett had 2 targets, 1 reception, and 44 yards and a touchdown last week. If that number does not proceed to increase in the coming weeks, we are going to see Tyler Lockett drop goose eggs in your wide receiver position soon. Luckily for him, he plays against the Pittsburgh Steelers this week, who were atrocious against Philip Dorsett, against Josh Gordon, against Julian Edelman. They destroyed the Pittsburgh Steelers secondary. Tyler Lockett should be good this week. Should find some success there. Hopefully could find more than 7 targets. Imagine that. Imagine Tyler Lockett with more than 7 targets. Just how good he could be. Just saying. All right. And also, Tyler Lockett, it has to do with the fact that they don't want to pass the ball. I don't get it. They threw the ball 20 times. Typically, when you throw the ball 20 times, it's because you're blowing out the other team. But no, the Seahawks, they just don't learn. They don't learn. All right, let's talk about my wide receiver 3s. Again, there are a lot of names that could have been put on this list. And there are 48 applicable wide receivers that can be started this week. So starting off with number 25, a Cincinnati Bengal, Tyler Boyd. After what John Ross was able to do on the outside, there's a good chance that if we leave Tyler Boyd in the slot, he can end up figuring it out. being that wide receiver 2 option that he typically has shown to be, and be a great threat in terms of this week against the 49ers defense. Sitting in the slot position it's a pretty good spot for him. That's exactly where he thrives in terms of fantasy production, especially from the sample size that we saw last year comparatively with and without AJ Green. If John Ross can pose that threat, pull double coverage because of his speed, Tyler Boyd is going to be even more and more open. I have him at 25. Number 26, DeSean Jackson. Now let me explain to you why. He had a monster week. Maybe that was just a one-time deal. Maybe he's going to end up dropping a goose egg this week. But for those of you who had picked up DeSean Jackson or had him on your bench, you kind of have to play him this week. Why? You play against the Atlanta Falcons defense. Sure, in terms of matchups, they didn't give up much points to the wide receiver position because they didn't have an opportunity. Kirk Cousins threw the ball 10 times. If Kirk Cousins wanted to, he could have thrown the ball 30 times and really lit up the Falcons defense. They don't look any better than they were last year, even with pieces coming back from injury. So DeSean Jackson being able to be that threat for this team, to really find the deep ball, it's going to be fantasy success in my opinion. So I like him at 26. 27, Allen Robinson. So here's the deal. Allen Robinson is playing against the Broncos. From what Tyrell Williams was able to do and the amount of targets Allen Robinson got last week and going forward as a pretty decent wide receiver play, why wouldn't he continue to be great? Why wouldn't they exactly copy what the Raiders did and just feed the ball to Allen Robinson? Whether he's running across the middle, deep routes, doesn't matter. Mitchell Trubisky loves him as his number 1 wide receiver. Matt Nagy is forcing the ball to him because outside of that, Anthony Miller's a no-show. Taylor Gabriel's dropping passes. Cordell Patterson's somehow lining up at running back for some reason and barely playing in special teams. Allen Robinson's the guy. He's my number 27. Moving on to 28. I mean, another one of these guys is going to be in a fantastic matchup. Michael Gallup, the number 2 wide receiver of the Dallas Cowboys playing against the Redskins. While Amari Cooper is on the other side of the field pulling over Josh Norman, Gallup's going to be running free and galloping into the end zone for a touchdown. So he's my number 28. Should be good. Moving on to 29, John Brown against the worst defense against the wide receiver. They're playing against the New York Giants. And with John Brown's speed and the amount of targets, again, that he got last week, this is just juicy matchups, plain and simple. I cannot leave John Brown on my bench this week. It would be very difficult. You'd have to have a lot of these top-end wide receivers to pull that off and leave him on the bench. And even then, if you have to leave, I wouldn't even leave him on the bench. I'd play him because the upside of this week is so high. He could really produce another one of those big weeks just like he did last week. So number 29, John Brown. Moving on to 30, Jamison Crowder. Now that Quincy Enunwa is out with an injury, they bring in old man Demaryius Thomas. Jamison Crowder is going to run this team offensively through the passing game. I mean, here's the thing. Robbie Anderson still has that little banged up ankle. We still have old man Thomas. Really, Sam Darnold's not looking for anybody else. He drops back and he looks for Jamison Crowder and throws him the ball. And the way I see it, that's probably going to stay consistent. 14 receptions and 98 yards. That might not be the deal. But if he has 7 receptions this week for 60 yards in a full PPR, that's pretty good for fantasy purposes. I don't mind that as my wide receiver 3. I like Jamison Crowder at 30. Moving on to 31, Calvin Ridley. Another great wide receiver into a great matchup. The question is whether or not Calvin Ridley or Mohamed Sanu or even potentially Austin Hooper are going to take value away in potentially in this matchup. Julio Jones is going to get his. The issue is Mohamed Sanu played the most snaps at the wide receiver position this last week, similar to how he did last season. And the thing is, Mohamed Sanu even had just as many, if not, I think he had identical amount of targets than Calvin Ridley did. So to be honest, Calvin Ridley, we're hoping he's going to be that touchdown fiend that he typically is. But if it's Sanu's week, I wouldn't be surprised. So either way, I like Calvin Ridley into the matchup, and I'm just hoping for him. Moving on to 32, Jarvis Landry. Goodness, Jarvis and Odell were the shits last week. But you play into an easy matchup. Hopefully you can find yourself some success here. I have a hard time leaving you on my bench. Maybe, if you have John Brown, I'm doing it, right? But yeah, Jarvis, he should be fine. This is going to be a bounce back week for the Browns. Moving on to number 33, Larry Fitzgerald. Now, here's the thing. You play against the Baltimore Ravens. The Baltimore Ravens, they had a monster week 1 offensively, and a lot of that took away they took the air out of the building. And the offense of the Dolphins, they struggled. They took out Ryan Fitzpatrick. They put in Rosen, and he even was throwing interceptions. The way I see it, Kyler Murray in this offense with Cliff Kingsbury as the offensive coordinator, they want to throw the ball. They ran 4+ wide receiver formations for majority of the game. And if they get into that kind of a formation, I really do think it's going to test this defense and give the Cardinals a pretty good opportunity to compete in this game, especially with the opposing offense as of right now. So Larry Fitzgerald, my number 33 wide receiver. The number 1 wide receiver of this team. Number 2 is David Johnson. Number 3, Keyshawn Johnson. Christian Kirk. There's some talent there. So they're going to be able to spread the field, but Larry Fitzgerald is my 33. I like it a lot. Moving on to 34, John Ross. You can't get 13 targets in week 1, then play against the San Francisco 49ers and sit on my bench. I won't do it. It's going to be a test. If John Ross can at least put up 10 points this week as my wide receiver 3, I'm happy with it. And that's what I'm looking for. I'm not looking for a 2-touchdown week. That's very, very rare. There's a reason why so many people are surprised he ended up doing that. So as of right now, into the matchup at home, I like him as a wide receiver 3. That's where he sits. And he has the upside of really taking the top off the defense and proving why he was drafted so high a couple years back. Moving on to 35, Emmanuel Sanders, playing against the Bears. Really, Sanders is the number 1 wide receiver of this offense. They didn't really look for Sanders. They looked for Sutton and Hamilton for majority of that first half. Finally, they did a little bit of adjusting, and they fed the ball to Emmanuel Sanders, which they should have. He's the best wide receiver on that team, most experience. Against the Bears, it's a little sketchy, but I still don't mind it because Flacco is going to look for him while the other guys are getting smothered by the defense. The last wide receiver I wanted to mention on today's video, Will Fuller. The way that Sammy Watkins was able to destroy that secondary for the Jaguars, I mean, completely dismantle. I don't see why Will Fuller can't do the same. I do not see why he's not capable of doing that. He absolutely is. And he can... AJ Boye didn't do anything. They just nobody even wanted to tackle Sammy Watkins at times. So as of right now, this Texans team, it looks good. And Will Fuller, with his speed, looking healthy right now, I have him as my number 36 wide receiver. A good upside play against the Jaguars at home this week. Should be fun. All right, guys. Again, there are a lot of wide receivers I didn't mention, but there are a lot of wide receivers this week that have a very good matchups and or can be played at your wide receiver 3 or flex. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed this content today. I cannot believe I said plain and simple about 40 times. Somebody count it up for me if you can. But anyway, thank you very much, everyone. Until tomorrow, we will have quarterbacks and tight end rankings, and we'll figure that out. But until then, thank you again, everybody, for watching, and I'll see you guys tomorrow. Peace.